the sort of incidents we're talking about are. So it's hardly surprising that we're talking a bit tough here.
It's good to talk to you about it. Thank you, Deborah. Deborah Powell on the panel. Let's end with a happy story. Oamaru, as we know, is on the proverbial roll. It's got the Whitestone Precinct and the Penguins and steampunk. It's an attractive destination. And now the community-owned local licensing trust has come up with an idea which the local council likes. Pretty exciting, says the mayor. A floating hotel offshore. Sort of thing you'd expect in places like Dubai. Would you like a night bobbing on the waves off the coast of town, looking at the lights of the... I can see you're thinking about this. Gary, would it appeal to you?
Well, yes, it is quite interesting, and it's such an interesting place these days.
It is.
It must have the heaviest concentration of eccentrics this side of the Black Stump, I think.
Except this. Well, let's find out how eccentric and how practical this idea is. The Oamaru Licensing Trust General Manager, Kathy Marker, is joining us. Good afternoon, Kathy. Oh, not yet. Okay. While she comes on, it's a multi-million-dollar idea, which you may think is too big for the town, but they don't think so in the town itself. So the hotel would sit on a big barge.
I have to say, I actually completely agree with Gary. My first response to this was it was mental, my instinctive response. But we went through Oamaru about a year ago, and it's where my mother's from, so I've been there a lot. And we were just blown away by the vibrancy of the town and all of these things that have happened there. And I would never, when I was going there as a young girl, have thought
that it could turn
into what it is. And so, a floating hotel, it seems a stretch, but given what's happened already...
Okay, Kathy's joining us. Kathy Marker, we've got on the phone now. Good afternoon, Kathy.
Good afternoon.
How big would the hotel be?
It's 25 rooms. It would be 3 levels with a rooftop, but
wow.
Remembering that the first level is actually the hull of the existing barge.
Do you have a big barge?
Look, it's not huge. If people have been Googling floating hotels, really the developer based it upon the Paris Seine. And if you go and have a look at that, you will see that's massive, absolutely huge. This is not anything like that, size-wise. Yeah.
Nevertheless, it captures the imagination, and 25 rooms is not to be sniffed at. So what is the likelihood you'll push the go button on this?
At this stage, we're still doing the financial planning. The developer is still finalising costs from their end. And we are still working on the overall lease costs because we will be leasing this building from the developer. We would like to think that we have, we're not being unrealistic. We're not committing to say that, yes, we will definitely do this without having all the relevant financial information. But we wanted to get it out there, particularly to the Oamaru public, simply because there's talk of lots of hotel-motel development in the Oamaru area.
Right, and essentially it's just a hotel with a difference. That's what you've got in mind.
Look, it's an experience.
Yeah, no, it would certainly be that.
Stay somewhere with an experience.
Yeah.
It's not a standard hotel.
No, it certainly would not be. And that's all we've got time for the hotel. And the panel today, Gary Moore, thank you very much. Nice to have your company. And Joe McCarroll.
Thank you, Jim.
Great to see you. Thanks, everybody. Checkpoint now.
Tō mara I hoa mā he kōrero kei te haere hei kaupapa kei te karawhiua. Tonight on Checkpoint, the Ministry for Primary Industries has referred evidence of serious staff misconduct to the Serious Fraud Office. The evidence came to light as a result of Official Information Act requests from RNZ. We have the latest. Dame Margaret Baisley's review into what happened at Russell McVeigh. MSD join us to respond to 2 nights of criticism of their treatment of benefit fraudsters who weren't benefit fraudsters. The latest from the cave rescue in Thailand, the death of an Auckland man after being tasered 4 times. Bank sales tactics, the Kiwibuild camp and CAP, and Eden Park, the former Prime Minister and the former New Zealander of the Year. All of that coming up shortly.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. A former lawyer is calling for a ministerial inquiry into the law firm Russell McVeigh. Today, Dame Margaret Baisley released a review into allegations of sexual misconduct relating to incidents at company parties over the summer of 2015 to 2016, in which several women were groped and kissed by a senior partner. Her report found a work hard, play hard culture, which led to excessive drinking and crude behaviour. Former lawyer Olivia Wensley, who left the profession after suffering years of inappropriate sexual behaviour, says high-level action is needed.
The law profession as a whole is far too small. Everyone knows each other and there's definitely circling of the wagon going on. That's why I think there needs to be a reform of legislation so that these abuses of power simply cannot continue.
Olivia Wensley says the sort of misconduct uncovered is endemic throughout the legal profession. Russell McVeigh says it's begun implementing recommendations from the report. The internet mogul Kim.com will take his fight to the country's top court. Today, the Court of Appeal upheld the decisions of the District and High Court that Mr.com and 3 of his co-accused are eligible for extradition to the United States. Edward Gay reports.
Mr.com, along with 3 others, face charges of money laundering and copyright breaches relating to the defunct file-sharing website Mega Upload. In a statement, Mr.com said he's more than disappointed by today's Court of Appeal decision. He said the ruling sets a precedent for other cases and exposes internet service providers to criminal liability for the misuse of their services. Mr.com said he's prepared to continue to fight for justice and hope to take his case to the Supreme Court. If his appeal fails, his fate will then rest with the Justice Minister, Andrew Little. I Tāmaki Makoto, ko Edward Gayaho.
The Ministry for Primary Industries has referred evidence of potential serious staff misconduct to the Serious Fraud Office. The evidence is already being investigated by the State Services Commission. Sharon Brett Kelly reports.
MPI says the evidence of serious misconduct is part of the State Services Commission's inquiry into the use of the security firm Thompson & Clark by all government departments. It says it does not involve the contracting of Thompson & Clark, but other matters likely to have occurred before October 2013 and involving staff no longer working for MPI. In a statement, the Ministry says it is extremely disappointed by the nature of the potential misconduct, but won't detail what it is. It says it held off disclosing the referral to the Serious Fraud Office until now to give the SFO the opportunity to properly evaluate the material. This is Sharon Brett Kelly.
Auckland Police are standing by the use of tasers in arresting a man who died several days later in hospital. Officers were called to a house in Freeman's Bay on Sunday where an elderly man was being violently assaulted. Alo Ngata, who was 29, was tasered 4 times by 2 police officers when they say he moved towards them in a threatening manner, ignoring repeated warnings. Having watched helicopter footage of the event, Superintendent Karen Malthus says the officers' actions were warranted.
If my police officers did not use their tasers, I would have 2 seriously injured police officers, if not dead. That the deceased was acting so violently that it would not have been the correct option to go forth and to try to lay hands on and restrain him in that way.
Karen Malthus. The case has been referred to the Independent Police Conduct Authority, WorkSafe and the coroner. Counter-terrorism police have taken over the investigation into the poisoning of a couple in southern England. The couple from Amesbury are critically ill in hospital after somehow being exposed to the nerve agent Novichok, which was used to poison the former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter in nearby Salisbury in March. The BBC's Gordon Carrera reports.
How exactly the Amesbury pair came into contact with the nerve agent is still unknown, and no one is sure how the original Novichok was mixed or carried, for instance, whether it was in a syringe or a vial. But Novichok is persistent and does not lose its potency over time. If this does prove to be the case, then it will raise concerns about whether there could be any further residue, and highlight that 4 months on, the original attack is still causing casualties.
Gordon Carrera in London. Locals looking to catch a glimpse of a whale in Wellington Harbour are being warned to keep their distance. The southern right whale has been in the harbour for the past few days, drawing crowds along the waterfront and lighting up social media. The Department of Conservation Marine Species Support Officer Helen Hendricks says boats, kayakers and other vessels must follow marine mammal rules.
I'd really like people to give it some space. So there are the marine mammals regulations that dictate how far you're supposed to stay away from the whale, and vessels should be 50 metres from the whale at all times, and only 3 vessels within 300 metres.
Hannah Hendricks. Meanwhile, the whale's visit could spell the end to the city's first ever Matariki fireworks display, as the council seeks expert advice as to whether it could harm the mammal. It's 5:30. Sport, the former Silver Fern and veteran Southern Steel player Wendy Frew is retiring from netball. Frew's announced today that this will be her last season in the ANZ Premiership. The 33-year-old played her one and only test for New Zealand against Australia in 2008. Last year she was badly injured when the team van crashed in Christchurch and needed 70 stitches. A month later, Frew ruptured her Achilles tendon but was determined to return to play for the Steel again this year. The Hurricanes have made 9 changes, both personnel and positional, as they try to arrest a losing slump that threatens to derail their Super Rugby season. After a poor performance against the Brumbies last weekend, the Hurricanes coach Chris Boyd has rung the changes ahead of their game against the Blues in Wellington on Saturday night. Captain Brad Shields returns to the starting lineup for what will be his 100th Super Rugby match, along with first 5 Beauden Barrett, while there's a reshuffle in the backline with Boyd unimpressed with the way it's operated in the past few matches.
I thought all the back 3 were pretty average last week, and so did they. So we decided to give Wes a chance at 13 and move Geordie into the back, and could have been any one of the 3 go, but in the end Ben Lamb drops to the bench and life goes on.
Chris Boyd. Anthony Gilling's Warriors contract will last just 1 season after he signed a Super League deal with Widnes from 2019. The Auckland-born Cook Islands international has struggled to break into the Warriors' first-choice starting lineup, making just 6 appearances. That's the news.
Fresh air on the way.
Still debating how quickly can they bring them out. And the race is against rain.
A lot of hot air.
We found they were avoiding talking about housing, so the opposition was very keen to talk about housing, lots of words spoken about housing, but actually the government did not respond.
There she blows.
At this time of the year, they like to come into coastal areas, inshore waters where it's nice and calm, and this was probably a calving ground.
A whale of a time. Morning Report with Guy and Espiner and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, Westland District Council's infrastructure woes as visitor numbers soar, dealing with foul-smelling oxidation ponds. And after 10, MasterChef, the professionals judge Monica Galetti, the Samoan-born New Zealander who the UK can't get enough of. Join Catherine Ryan after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather now through to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Auckland, cloudy periods, the odd shower, mainly near the coast. Waikato to Manawatu, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty and the central high country, mainly fine with morning frosts or fog in sheltered places. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, cloudy periods today with a few light showers north of Wairoa, fine tomorrow. Horowhenua, Kapiti and Wellington, fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow and a few showers developing. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and North Otago, fine with high cloud. Central Otago, Dunedin, Clutha and Southland, often cloudy with scattered light rain. Northwest gales in exposed places tomorrow night. For Buller and Westland, a few showers, turning to heavy rain south of the glaciers tomorrow. Fiordland, rain becoming persistent and heavy overnight. And the Chatham Islands, showers today, mainly fine tomorrow. It's 9 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina, and thanks everyone for being with us. We appreciate your company. The Ministry for Primary Industries has referred evidence of serious staff misconduct to the Serious Fraud Office. The evidence came to light as a result of Official Information Act requests from RNZ asking for MPI correspondence with the controversial security firm Thompson and Clark Clark. A fortnight ago, MPI referred evidence of staff misconduct to the State Services Commission, which is investigating the government's use of Thomson and Clark, but has refused to release the evidence to us. We now know that's because the misconduct appears prima facie to be so serious, the ministry itself regards the SFO as potentially the appropriate investigators. I'm joined in the studio by our reporter Zach Fleming, who's been covering the story, and along with Conan Young, was one of two RNZ reporters who filed those very revealing OIAs. Zach, what can you tell us?
Well, as you said, that Official Information Act response asked for all correspondence between MPI staff and Thomson and Clark staff since 2012, and it was in responding to that Official Information Act request that MPI discovered this evidence of serious staff misconduct. Now, MPI has been very, very careful with the wording it's used here. So it said that this serious staff misconduct is the same staff misconduct that it referred to the State Services Commission to investigate, and the State Services Commission is investigating the government's use of external security consultants, including Thomson and Clark. But it said that this evidence doesn't concern the contracting of Thomson and Clark. So it may be about Thomson and Clark, but not the contracting of...
Right, so can I clarify? So as a result of the investigations, in response to the OIA requests about what the ministry was doing with Thomson and Clark, they have found
the serious staff misconduct.
Okay.
But they have said it doesn't relate to
prima
the
facie,
contract.
right? So they, and it must be serious because there is a threshold under which you do not go to the SFO.
Yeah, the SFO only investigates complex, very serious bribery, corruption and fraud cases, and most of the cases that are referred to them aren't investigated. They only take the very highest ones.
Have we heard from the SFO yet?
They have said that a matter has been referred, but beyond that they are declining to comment. This is a very historical serious staff misconduct. So MPI said it happened before October 2013, and the people who are alleged to have done this no longer work for MPI. MPI said that they waited to refer this to release the decision to refer it to the Serious Fraud Office, to give the Serious Fraud Office a chance to consider all of the material. But they say that MPI says it won't be making any further comment while the State Services Commission is investigating.
And I guess that makes sense, and I guess it also explains why you have had such resistance from MPI to telling you what, in fact, they are looking at.
So other government agencies have found evidence of misconduct as well. The SIS found evidence that its staff were helping Thomson and Clark to get contracts with other government agencies, and the SIS released that evidence. And so when MPI said that it had evidence of serious staff misconduct, we said, well, show us the evidence. And they said no and refused to say anything else. So for the last 2 weeks it has been complete silence. We cannot tell you anything else, and now we have learned today that's because the Serious Fraud Office may potentially investigate. They've referred it to the Serious Fraud Office.
So we wait to hear from them next. The ball's in their court.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. It's an absolutely fascinating story, this one. Great work, Zach Fleming, our reporter who fired in this OIA about the relationship between the ministry and Thomson and Clark. We look forward to the SFO telling us what they're going to do. An 89-page report into sexual harassment at Russell McVeigh is damning not only of the incidents themselves, but of the response to them and the broader culture within the law firm that allowed for so little to initially be done in response to them. Dame Margaret Baisley's independent review into a series of incidents involving Summer Clarks in Wellington, that's university students doing basic work or work experience, who were plied with alcohol, then groped and harassed, and who then struggled for adequate support or to have their complaints rigorously investigated, does say the culture at the law firm has changed. But 2.5 years ago, behaviour was completely inappropriate, complaints were handled poorly, judgment was lacking, and the young women who'd been subjected to it all were intimidated, confused and uncomfortable. The review was released this morning.
So as you're aware, Russell McVeigh asked me to review claims that 5 Summer Clarks were sexually harassed over a 3-week period in the summer of 2015-16 by a partner and solicitor from one team in the firm's Wellington office, and it's important to understand it was just one team in the Wellington office.
That was the starting point, as declared by Dame Margaret Baisley herself at the beginning of a media conference in the Wellington office she had just referred to.
I was also asked to review any other incidents, the firm's framework of policies, standards and systems and its culture,
And what did she find after 4 months spent hearing from over 250 people?
The firm has had a work hard, play hard culture that involved excessive drinking and in some instances crude, drunken and sexually inappropriate behaviour. Young staff were encouraged to drink to excess.
There were what Dame Margaret referred to as the incidents, elaborated on later in the media conference by her legal counsel, Simon Mount, beginning with what was called Incident 1, but was in fact a series of events over a short period.
And just in broad terms, this was the series of 4 incidents that occurred at a Wellington office Christmas party shortly before Christmas, December 2015. Incident 2 is something that was said to have occurred at the home of the partner concerned from the particular team a couple of days after the firm-wide Christmas party. And then Incident 3, both of these are across the page on page 20. This was at a Wellington bar on the day that the firm returned after the Christmas holidays in 2016.
So there were the incidents over Christmas, which in the first instance involved encouraging young summer clerks to drink, then groping them, including on the breasts, waist and hips. And then, as Dame Margaret addressed as plainly and directly as anything she said this morning, there was Russell McVeigh's response.
In reviewing the firm's response to the incidents, I found failings in the firm's governance structure, management, policies, standards and systems, and they lacked a code of conduct. And these failings contributed to the poor management of the students in 2015-16. I found there was no one in charge in the Wellington office. The team where the incident happened was out of control, and what was happening in that team was not noticed by partners or the board.
The board was there listening on in the person of its new chair, Malcolm Crotty, and when Dame Margaret finished, he picked up.
The first thing I want to say on behalf of the firm is how profoundly sorry we are for the serious impact that the incidents over the summer of 2015 and 2016 have had on the young woman affected and indeed on our people.
All findings were accepted, all recommendations adopted.
I want to acknowledge that our handling of the incidents was poor and to apologise for both our actions and inactions.
Inactions is an important addition to Russell McVeigh's acceptance of responsibility. If Dame Margaret's starting point has been, as we've heard her say, the actions of
just one team in the Wellington office,
it was what happened or didn't happen next that was found to speak to a larger cultural failing. After Incident 2, and I quote, "No formal investigation followed. The firm then went on holiday for Christmas." In short, it was difficult for the young clerks to complain, and again this is a quote from the report, there was no formal or informal follow-up with the clerk who had informed HR, either at the time or after the Christmas break. And even when the young women were told the partner was leaving, and again I quote, "It has only been very recently that the summer clerks involved in Incident 1 have learned that the partner left the firm for a number of reasons that were largely unrelated to their experiences." And then, when Newsroom broke the story in February, Russell McVeigh issued strong denials. So, the acknowledgement, acceptance, apologies and contrition that Russell McVeigh now freely offer and Dame Margaret accepts are meaningful, certainly weren't immediate. Here's Malcolm Crotty again.
I also want to address the inaccurate statements that we made to the media earlier this year. Again, we take collective responsibility for those errors. We all believed that what we were saying at the time was correct. We now know that it was not. I want to acknowledge and apologise for this on behalf of the firm.
The apologies flowed as the alcohol had, and 2.5 years on, the buck stopped everywhere.
I can tell you that we have taken collective responsibility for what has happened as a partnership and for the cultural change that you heard about that needs to occur at Russell McVeigh.
There and elsewhere, said Dame Margaret.
And as I mentioned, a recent survey of all lawyers by the New Zealand Law Society revealed that bullying and harassment are problems across the entire legal profession.
And what of Russell McVeigh itself and their response to the events, reactions and non-reactions described?
The firm has accepted my recommendations set out in the report, and I believe with the leadership of the current board, which is a very different board to the one that was in place at the time of the incidents, with the leadership of that board, I'm confident it is well placed for the changes ahead.
The universal and the particular. Has the harassment stopped?
So after the incidents 2.5 years ago, the firm moved decisively to address these issues, and they began to change the culture. And so 2.5 years later, during my review, I was not told of any recent instances of sexual harassment.
Dame Margaret Baisley, after 6, though, we will hear from a former lawyer who left the sector after suffering years of inappropriate sexual behaviour and who says this review is simply window dressing. Anne-Marie May will bring us that story in under an hour from now. It's 5:20. Cave divers in Thailand are setting up a rope safety line through the vast Tham Luang cave in preparation for an attempt to bring a group of boys to safety. The 12 boys and their football coach have been trapped in the cave for 11 days. We all know the details of this extraordinary story. They're now being cared for by Thai Navy divers and a medic. But with monsoon rain set to fall in the next couple of days, it's a race against time if the rescuers are going to attempt to get the boys out before renewed flooding. CNN correspondent David McKenzie joins us now. David, we're delighted to have you with us. We know how busy you are. Thanks for being available. What's the latest? Has a decision been made yet about whether the boys are coming out in the next day or two?
Well, Jonathan, we don't know. That's a simple answer. And as I stand here, let me just paint the scene for your listeners. We've got rescue trucks all over the place mounting this extraordinary attempt at a rescue of these boys. I see some Thai rescue divers, Navy SEAL divers catching a bit of a breath. Their scuba regulators hanging up next door to them. Now, what the governor has said, who's in charge of this rescue mission, is that they are doing everything they can to mitigate the risk of trying to get these boys out. Now, the main thing they're doing is pumping out almost 2 million litres of water per hour from 3 pumps to try and reduce the level of that flood water. So perhaps that some of the way out, if they choose to go out the entrance, will be through wading, not through actually diving through this zero visibility muck. And now the other thing, Jonathan, they're looking at is 20 to 30 teams are trekking around the cave system on the surface to see if there are any chimneys or air accesses where they could possibly drill down. Now, they're saying they won't comment whether any of the young boys will be out today or even if the rescue is going to be attempted. They said they want zero risk. I have to say, given the technical nature of this rescue, making it zero risk would be extremely challenging at this point, Jonathan.
Yeah, this is fascinating, isn't it? Because there was such jubilation, such excitement when the boys were found. And the what next seemed relatively simple, just get them out. Now is pressure starting to mount? Is there a sense of trepidation? How are the families as they wait and wait?
It must be agonizing for the families. One of the main things they're trying to do is something as would seem simple as getting a telephone line, Jonathan, through these cave systems to the boys so that they can speak to their parents. Their first attempt at that failed. The phone somehow got out of its packaging and got waterlogged. So I saw just about an hour ago them taking optic cables and an old school sort of green telephone, army-style phone, to try to do that again. So if something as relatively simple as getting a wire through this cabling to these boys is that difficult, then imagine getting a human being out. Yeah. They described from the staging area, which is in the chamber 3 of this cave, for professional technical divers to get to the boys takes 5 to 6 hours at this point. So it's going to be extremely challenging for that length of time. Obviously, you'd have to have scuba tanks laid along the route. The first person going down should be able to see quite clearly, but anyone after them will kick up the muck and it will be zero visibility. So, you know, the prospect of these boys getting out easily, I think, is zero. Of them getting out at all is the big question now. They are quietly confident they'll find a solution, but with major rains scheduled for in a day or two, and the monsoon season not really starting in earnest just yet, but could start very soon. It is a race against time, potentially. Jonathan?
David McKenzie, live, CNN's correspondent up there, live on the phone to us. David, we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us. It's 24 minutes past 5. I'm changing my name by default to Jonathan. Quite like the sound of it. Later on Checkpoint, we are going to be joined by the Ministry of Social Development. We've been looking over the past couple of nights at the treatment of benefit fraudsters who aren't, in fact, benefit fraudsters. MSD are going to front just after the business news at about 25 to 6. We look forward to that. A friend of the British couple struck down by the same nerve agent used to poison a former Russian agent has described their frightening symptoms. The couple are from Amesbury, 13k from Salisbury, where Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia were poisoned with Novichok. They've been treated in hospital for what police believe was an accidental poisoning. This is all very confusing. The ABC's Thomas Aretti is trying to make some sense of it.
The case was intriguing to begin with.
He said he felt he'd been poisoned and that. And then he was rocking against the wall, making funny noises.
That's Sam Hobson, speaking from the town of Amesbury. He's described himself as a friend of a man and a woman in their 40s who were taken to hospital over the weekend.
His eyes were wide open, glazed, red and pinpricked. And he was sweating, dribbling, making weird noises. I was speaking to him, getting no response.
It's been a mystery ever since. But at first, the suspected cause was perhaps not as sinister.
Well, they thought first that it was drugs, but now they know it's not the drugs. It's definitely something to do with the nerve agents. That's what they're treating them for in the hospital.
Now, that's been confirmed by police. They were exposed to the nerve agent Novichok, and counter-terrorism officers have taken over the investigation. Neil Basu was Scotland Yard's Assistant Commissioner for Counter-Terrorism.
We have cordoned off a number of sites in the Amesbury and Salisbury areas that we believe the two individuals visited in the period before they fell ill. This is a precautionary measure while we continue to investigate how they came to be exposed to this substance.
It's that substance that's changed everything. Novichok was also used to poison former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia back in March. The town of Amesbury is just 13 kilometres from Salisbury, where the Skripals were found. And incidentally, this case comes just a couple of weeks after Prince Charles visited the area to give the community a boost. Now, this advice from England's Chief Medical Officer, Sally Davies.
I should also warn the public to be careful, as always, of picking up any unknown or already dangerous objects, such as needles and syringes. You do not need to seek advice from a health professional unless you are experiencing symptoms, as any individual who had been significantly exposed at the same time wouldn't by now have symptoms.
But according to Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu, health experts don't believe there's a significant risk to the wider public.
I do want to reassure the public that there is no evidence that either this man or woman recently visited any of the sites that have been decontaminated following the attempted murders of Sergei and Yulia Skripal.
Police haven't named the couple, but friends have named them as Charlie Rowley and Dawn Sturgis, two British nationals who were local to the area. And that raises further questions. Were they deliberately targeted? Are the two cases linked? Or was it all an accident? And if it's the latter, then how did they come into contact with a nerve agent developed by the Soviet military in the Cold War? There are now 100 counter-terrorism detectives working on the case, and the two people at the centre of it all remain in a critical condition in hospital.
Quite extraordinary, that report from the ABC. 28 past 5. Should couples who earn a combined income of $180,000 be in the running to buy one of the government's affordable homes? That's the question we've been putting to prospective Auckland home buyers. 15,000 people have registered their interest in the Kiwibuild scheme since the details were revealed yesterday. The Housing Minister, Phil Twyford, says the relatively high income cap is fair because many couples earning that much have been shut out of high demand, high price markets like Auckland and Queenstown. But as Jessie Chang reports, not everyone agrees with him.
Fazil Ali and his partner Pipirangi Snowball are out on the streets of Otahuhu with their young child. They are a family trying to get by on a single salary of $29,000 a year. That's less than 1/6 of the Kiwibuild cap. Mr Ali says the pool of people being allowed to buy one of the Kiwibuild homes is too broad.
That's not really fair. It's keeping a circle. Keep the poor poor and make the rich richer. That's all I see.
The government wants to build 100,000 affordable houses within a decade to get more New Zealanders owning homes. But Mr Ali is sceptical about whether he'll ever be a homeowner.
When one is working and one staying home taking care of baby, it is really much of a big gap, because with one income, that's impossible, in other words, for us.
Lenny Whippy says most people in the area just aren't earning high salaries.
For what I know, is probably in average, so from between 20 to 40 Ks a year. For a new couple, will be in combined of 80, under 80 K a year.
Mr Whippy says it's tough for them to have to compete with others who are earning tens of thousands of dollars more. Out in Papakura, Nick Muir has recently just bought his first home, but he agrees the cap should be lower.
And I feel like the Kiwibuild's more suited towards the lower income families and couples trying to get them into a first home. So from that perspective, probably think it's a bit high. I would have thought probably closer to 120 or around that area would have been, kind of fairer target.
And it's not just those in Auckland who are questioning the limit. The Mayor of Tauranga, Greg Brownless, says he thinks the cap should be as low as $100,000.
The general feeling is, well, if we're going to do this to help the needy, then when your combined income is over $100,000 a year, you can hardly describe that as being in sort of needy circumstances compared to people who are on half that.
The government has set the salary limit for a sole purchaser at $120,000. There will be a ballot system for prospective buyers, with those whose names are drawn getting the first chance to buy. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, kōrisi chain tēnei.
You are with Checkpoint on RNZ, and thank you for being with us. Coming up, we're going to talk to Viv Rickard, who's with MSD now, about how they treat beneficiaries and who can accuse beneficiaries of fraud and in what circumstances. That interview's straight after business news. Also coming up, the pressure on bank staff to achieve sales targets. We're going to look at that. Double-decker buses in Wellington, Wales in Wellington, and after 6 we're going back to Russell McVeigh. But before any of it, Katrina Batten with the headlines.
A former lawyer who endured years of inappropriate sexual behaviour is calling for a ministerial inquiry into Russell McVeigh. Olivia Wensley says the sort of misconduct uncovered in Dame Margaret Baisley's review of allegations relating to the law firm is endemic throughout the legal profession. The Ministry for Primary Industries has referred evidence of potential serious staff misconduct to the Serious Fraud Office. MPI says the evidence is part of the State Service Commission's inquiry into the use of the security firm Thomson & Clark by all government departments. It says the actions occurred before October 2013 and involve staff who were no longer working for the ministry, but which says it's extremely disappointed by the nature of the potential misconduct. The Auckland Police are defending the use of tasers to arrest a man who died in hospital yesterday. Officers were called to a house in Freeman's Bay on Sunday where an elderly man was being violently assaulted. The police say 29-year-old Alo Nata from Tonga was tasered 4 times when he moved towards 2 police officers in a threatening way. The internet businessman Kim.com is taking his fight against extradition to the Supreme Court after losing his latest appeal. Mr. .com and his 3 co-accused face charges of fraud and copyright breaches. Today, the Court of Appeal upheld lower court decisions that the 4 are eligible for extradition to the United States. A visiting southern right whale that has been frolicking in Wellington Harbour could spell the end to the city's first ever Matariki fireworks display. The whale has been in the harbour for the past few days, drawing crowds along the waterfront and lighting up social media. The Wellington Deputy Mayor Jill Day says the council is seeking expert advice on whether the fireworks display could harm the whale. And emergency services are at the scene of a serious crash involving a truck and a car near Tokoroa on State Highway 1. The police were called to the accident between Tamatea Road and West Road at 4:15. The road is closed. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now with Patrick O'Mara beaming in from Wellington. Hi, Patrick. A unit of the troubled CBL Group has been sold.
Yes, indeed, John. Now, I'm sure you remember CBL Corporation. It was placed in voluntary administration back in February, and this was after the Reserve Bank had tried to put the group's insurance unit, CBL Insurance, into liquidation because of fears that it might not be able to cover possible claims. Now, KordaMentha is the administrator of that. It's now put its British subsidiary PFP, which provides fee protection insurance. It's sold it to 2 private equity firms in the US. We don't actually have any detail about the deal nor the price. They're remaining silent on that. But the issue here is it raises some interesting questions about the future of the company, because 2 of the directors of CBL Group have tried to put together this rescue plan to keep it afloat, not put it into liquidation as the Reserve Bank would have it. But KordaMentha are now selling off bits and pieces of it. So there is a liquidation hearing which is going to be heard at the end of July. The question is, by the time we get to that, how many more units might be sold?
Yeah. It's a fascinating case, isn't it, the CBL? The government's books, the government's finances remain in good shape, Patrick. The latest figures tell us.
Indeed it does, John. I know there is some question marks over the slowdown in the economy, but the government's tax take still looking very healthy on forecast. Basically, we saw, excluding investment losses and gains, the operating surplus stood at $5.2 billion for the 11 months to May. So we haven't got the full picture yet, just a month to go.
Yeah.
But that's nearly $500 million more than what they had forecast. Now, the interesting thing out of that, John, from perspective of perhaps teachers and nurses, is how much of that extra pot might go to help get this pay deal over the line, which is looking slightly shaky at the present time. I guess the other interesting thing is that their net debt target, it's at 20.1%. That's just a shade above where the government had hoped to be by 2022.
Yeah, it is,
so again, just a little bit of extra money that might be out there for them to borrow to get some of these big infrastructure projects, such as highways, schools, medical facilities that we're all crying out for, particularly up in Auckland.
Thanks, Patrick. What are the markets do today? I haven't heard a thing about them.
Look, well, a late run, John. After just half an hour ago, we were saying they weren't doing anything at all. They put on 37 points in a late spurt to close at 9,063. The dollar, pretty steady though, 67.6 US, 91.8 Australian, and British pence, 51.1.
Thank you very much, Patrick O'Mara, doing business news for us this week from Wellington, and we appreciate it. Roughly 80% of the 9,000 allegations of benefit fraud the Ministry of Social Development receives each year are false. As we reported last night, MSD receives 1 an hour every day. Most come through its anonymous tip offline. It's easy to dob someone in, and there's no comeback if the allegations aren't true. And what this can result in, as we reported last night, is the state effectively going after beneficiaries on behalf of abusive ex-partners. In some cases, vulnerable people are wrongly reported for fraud by vindictive exes that have taken a protection order, have had a protection order taken out against them. I'm just going to cough. I think I'm going to be all right. I have a frog in my throat. MSD declined to be interviewed about this story yesterday, but joining me now live is its Deputy Chief Executive of Service Delivery, Viv Rickard. Mr. Rickard, we're delighted to have you with us, and I apologise in advance if I cough in your ear. I'm not meaning to be rude. I just seem to have swallowed something in the studio. Anyway, let's
Kia ora, John. How are you?
Yeah, kia ora. I'm good. I'm good. Thank you for being with us. Let's talk about MSD's attitude towards beneficiaries. Over the past 2 nights, as we have covered these stories, we have had people describe you as punitive, as bullying, as regarding them as guilty until proven innocent. It's pretty unfortunate the way you're being described.
Yeah, of course I've listened to the commentary, and it's always disappointing to hear the commentary, and I understand where it's coming from, but I think the balancing piece on this, I don't make any apologies for trying to look after government and taxpayers' money. However, I think the key issue is are we assessing the information that comes to us appropriately? I've got assurance today that we are, that we have a robust system in place to assess the information that comes in. Of course, there will be some vindictive people and that's assessed in terms of information. We don't start investigations on every piece of information that comes to us, but it's prudent for us to do so.
Yeah, although let's look. How many investigations last year? 5,992 was the figure I had. Is that right? Roughly right?
Yeah, that's about right. I've looked at the 5-year trends as well, and it's around about that type of figure in terms of the number of investigations, in terms of the number of calls we get in or information we get in. That's, depending on which year, about 3,000 or 4,000 higher. But the reality is we're actually prosecuting a small number of the information that we receive. We resolve a lot of them without going through any lines of prosecution. That's what you'd expect us to do. And the numbers are minuscule in terms of the matters we're taking.
Absolutely. So you did 5,992 investigations last year. How many of them led to prosecutions?
Well, we were down under the 600 mark in terms of the numbers.
Okay,
prosecutions.
Yeah, so fewer than 10%. In other words, it seems to me that you said the test is quite a high one before investigations commence. And MSD have told us off the record and in statements there is a rigorous filter. But the very low number of prosecutions relative to the high number of investigations would suggest the opposite of that.
Well, that's you could argue that point, but the reality is this, is that we don't have to prosecute every matter where we've found an overpayment. There are a number of overpayments. You do not have to prosecute when we've identified we've overpaid. If we find it's fraudulent behaviour, and that's only a small amount of numbers, as you've said, 10%, we will take action on behalf of the taxpayer and on behalf of New Zealanders to claim that money back, and so we should.
Okay. Yeah, and look, if there is fraud, there will be no one listening who doesn't support your right to claim the money back. MSD has a dedicated team of specialist fraud investigators throughout the country. How many in that team?
I don't actually know the actual number. I do know that we've got some dedicated people throughout the country who are very experienced in this.
Roughly how many? Roughly how many?
I would be guessing in terms of ballpark figures, John, without trying to be evasive. I'm probably in week 3 in terms of my Ministry of Social Development work, and it's I wouldn't want to give you the wrong figures, but there'd be under 100 people that we've got in that area is my guesstimate today. But I have had advice in terms of their experience and what they do, and the reality is we're dealing with a number of these matters without going to court and sorting them out, and that's what you'd expect. That's what happens in the criminal system as well.
Okay, so you've got somewhere under 100 specialist fraud investigators. Now, they receive tip-offs. I went to your website today. It is very easy to make a tip-off, and you can, as MSD assures people, do so anonymously. Now, we have heard of cases where people who have protection orders against them from their former partners who they have abused or been violent towards, making anonymous complaints, anonymous accusations, anonymous allegations that people are benefit fraudsters. Do you think it is appropriate that those people are regarded as credible witnesses?
No. In terms of the information itself, it has to be assessed. You have to think about the motives. You have to be objective. Of course, there's some vindictive behaviour that occurs with humans.
If the complaints are anonymous, how do you think about the motives?
Well, we operate anonymous lines throughout New Zealand. We have a line called Crime Stoppers for people to ring in anonymously to advise the police of information anonymously and independently. This is the same. People have the opportunity to ring and advise us that they think some people may be acting inappropriately or receiving money they're not entitled to. Prudent for us to investigate that. On a small number of occasions, we prosecute people, but I'm confident that we've got the right processes in place to assess whether.
Are you confident? Because so many people are telling us you don't have the right process, that there is no particular process at all. 5,992 investigations with 400, somewhere between 400 and 600 prosecutions would suggest you don't have the right process, that your filter, that your sieve is too thick. If we go back to the Court of Appeal in Rooker versus the Department of Social Welfare in 1997, people have been saying this about the ministry for a very long time, that people with an axe to grind, that people who've been violent towards their former partners, that people who are cynical, vexatious, bullying, or just not good people can make complaints, and the ministry is not rigorous enough in applying a filter.
Look, I can tell you, I hear you loud and clear. And I think, of course, people like me would be concerned about that. My sense is this, though, that there's times when the ministry deserves to get a criticism, and we'll accept that and look to improve it. But what we're trying to do is change the way we do our business. We're trying to have a more caring approach and looking after our clients, have them at the centre.
How?
We're taking some time.
How are you doing that? Is that a rhetorical flourish from you? How is that being manifest?
I'm not really known for my rhetorical flourishes, but thank you. No, look, this is a program of behavioural change and cultural change in terms of what's important to the ministry. We are here to help New Zealanders improve their lives, to be safe and independent and strong. So that's what we do. It's not about having sanctions. It's never going to be about that. It's about helping New Zealanders. I know that we're dealing with some of these issues from years gone by. I'm starting to take, we're thinking about the organisation moving forward and the organisation we want to be. It's not one we want to be benefit bashing. I talk to frontline people and they're really excited about the opportunity to think differently about our role. We're engaging with 28,000 people a day. And the vast majority of those people are getting fantastic service. Look, we've got 7,000 people in the ministry. We get it wrong sometimes. And so I accept that. But in terms of the benefit piece, I'm not making any apologies for looking into information. We do need to ensure that we're assessing the information that's coming in, so vindictive people or people just trying to get at others are using us as a mechanism to do that. And I think by the number of investigations and the number of prosecutions, that shows that.
Vivica, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. We would love your feedback on that. 2101 is the number to text us on, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. A bank employee has blown the whistle on what she's calling morally disgusting sales tactics being pushed by her bank. She told RNZ about income protection insurance being sold to an elderly person who, because they were claiming a pension, would never be able to claim the insurance. Then there's the emotional blackmail she says has been used on customers with children who are asked how they will feed their children if they are made redundant and don't have insurance. Conan Young is looking at this for us.
The stories from the front lines of the banking sector have come from a worker too afraid to identify themselves or the bank they work for fear they might be sacked for speaking out. But we can tell you that they work for one of the 4 big Australian-owned banks. The worker says those who fail to meet sales targets for products like income protection insurance, life insurance and KiwiSaver funds are performance managed. The bank worker told RNZ the pressure on staff to sell more was intense and stressful and led to many taking sick days. She talked about one elderly couple on a pension who ended up paying $200 worth of premiums a fortnight to their bank for products including income protection insurance. She said many customers defer to bank staff when they suggest they buy such products and purchase them even if they don't need them, often returning to the bank later when they realise the expense. I didn't have to ask too many people on the streets of Christchurch before I found those with a story to tell about being given the hard sell by their bank, including Shah Shavs.
I got a personal loan quite a while ago and they said to, get insured and all of that, and I was like, no.
What sort of insurance were they selling you, or trying to sell you?
Life insurance. So, they're kind of predicting if I get cancer or some sickness, so, that will cover it, but...
You're pretty young, you look pretty healthy, you're not too worried about your life insurance at the moment?
No, not. No, definitely not, yeah.
And so how insistent were they in trying to sell this to you?
Very insistent, yeah, especially a bank like ANZ, yeah, very pushy.
Thomas Goldsmith's bank has also tried to upsell him.
I went to apply for a credit card and she tried to sell me life insurance, I think. Home insurance, it just seems to be they get you where you're in there. So you're in there with something else and they try to sell you like heaps of stuff. But I think it's pretty annoying, to be honest.
How do they sort of broach the topic with you?
I think they just tend to slide it into the conversation. So often it'll be like, oh, by the way, while you're banking with us, you can also get this rate and this offer.
Sue Stewart's brother was on the other side of the table, selling products for a bank he worked for 13 years ago. She says he found the stress of sales targets intolerable.
Once they got you in there, and you signed up for something, they wanted you to sign up for more. And I believe, talking to different people that work in banks, that's the policy. You must get these people off their seat and signed up with something more, or your job could be on the line.
A budgeting mentor with the Kia Waitakere Trust, Ian Davies, says income protection insurance is not something he would advise for most of his clients.
We have clients who actually genuinely have to claim when they lose their job, for example, and they're not able to claim or they're accepted, but they say our payments don't start for kind of 3 months' time. You know, you need to, if you lose your job, you don't need to wait 3 months for payments. You need the payments to start now.
Mr Davies believes this sort of insurance is probably a better deal for the banks than it is for their customers.
You know, if those products were actually of value to the consumer, then there wouldn't be a problem. But they're actually just an insurance policy for the banks, is what I always see. They're just covering their risk in case the lender loses their job.
RNZ approached the four main banks about the claims made by the unnamed bank worker. ASB says it's interested in maintaining its customers' financial well-being and meets its responsible lending obligations. ANZ says only 25% of its incentives for staff are based on sales and it doesn't have sales targets. BNZ says it's committed to ensuring customers aren't sold products they don't need or can't afford. Westpac says the examples provided don't lead it to believe that the bank worker was a member of its staff. The Financial Markets Authority is currently reviewing banking practices in light of problems found with the Australian banking sector, which is currently the subject of a Royal Commission of Inquiry. For Checkpoint, ko Konanyang Tene.
Former Prime Minister Helen Clark has fired back at Sir Ray Avery in their escalating dispute over a planned charity concert at Eden Park in Auckland. Sir Ray Avery wants the Live Aid-style concert to be held next Waitangi Day to raise money to create life pod incubators for premature babies in developing countries. The pharmaceutical scientist and inventor says that would save children's lives. But Helen Clark, who lives about 400 metres from the stadium, has made a submission opposing the event. Why? I asked her.
Firstly, there's never been concerts at Eden Park. It's not a permitted activity. It is a sports venue, and over the years the residents have accepted new things around the sports. For example, the stadium was enhanced for the World Cup. There's the night games with the big lights and so on. But the red line has always been drawn at concerts. There's been around 5 previous attempts to get permission for concerts, including an Eden Park Trust submission to the Unitary Plan, which wanted 50 night events, which included concerts. So there's a real history to this. And under the RMA, of course, the residents have rights to say, please uphold the conditions that we have around the use of the park. We're happy with the way it is at the moment, but you're going over a red line here.
But where Sir Ray Avery, former New Zealander of the Year, is really taking this fight to you is that this concert is for charity. It's about saving babies.
This is why I've described it as a Trojan horse application, because Eden Park Trust has not been successful with previous attempts to get concerts at the park. There is no need for such a concert to be held at Eden Park. You have Mount Smart, not a great distance away, a well-known concert venue in Auckland, and it could be held there without problems. But there is, I think, this sort of hidden reason behind it being so enthusiastically embraced by the Eden Park Trust.
Right, so you're saying that whilst this might be for a very good cause, and clearly it is, it would become a precedent.
That's correct. It becomes a precedent for concerts which have not been a permitted activity in the past. And once you set that precedent, well, who knows where it goes. There's also, John, if you explore further, on the table still the idea of a central business district stadium. Now, you've got North Harbour, you've got Mount Smart, there's Eden Park, and maybe CBD, downtown Auckland, where there's obviously good access from all transport routes in. Now, that's probably the long-term ideal, but if Eden Park managed to get its business case up for concerts, then you'll never see that ideal of a CBD stadium realised. So there's quite a lot in behind what looks like an innocuous application.
I've been doing investigative research on Twitter, that font of all journalistic knowledge, of course, and people are saying you're being mean.
Well, there's a particular type of troll on those sites, isn't there, which pretty much falls into line with the rather bullying approach that Mr. Avery has adopted. Now, he's probably picked the wrong person to try to bully on directly attacking me. But I guess my point is that how does this make the ordinary citizen around Eden Park feel that if you put your head up and oppose something that a prominent New Zealander wants, that you're going to be savaged in the media and called all sorts of things, as I am. Now, I've got broad shoulders, but this is obviously meant to be intimidating to others who might want to exercise their rights as local residents, and that's not on. People have rights under the Resource Management Act.
Helen Clark talking about Eden Park. Let's go to Wellington, where the wheels fell off at a launch for new electric buses for the capital's network after the Environment Minister publicly called out the Regional Council over its treatment of bus drivers. 32 services were cancelled this morning after several drivers failed to turn up a week ahead of the new contract kicking in. 106 people are being made redundant as a result of that new contract. How's this all come together? Well, our political editor, Jane Patterson, is going to explain.
An appropriate song.
Those present were there to celebrate the introduction of 10 purely electric buses, the first of 32 to be in place by 2021. But there are already rumbles of discontent around the city about some of the new routes and higher fares. The host from the public transport network Metlink told those present it marks a new phase for the capital city.
We like earth-friendly public transport in this region. And we can't do it without the support of our staff, our operators, and more importantly, our customers. After all, when you run a public transport service, you have to take people with you.
But in an unexpected turn of events, the Minister and guest speaker David Parker brought up the way Wellington's bus drivers had been treated in the contract renewal process.
There have been controversies around the way in which this was tendered, and there are some people still feeling aggrieved that they feel that they lost in the process and that terms and conditions were eroded.
He said the government was specifically changing the law to avoid these kinds of practices.
In the hope that when these sorts of things are tendered in the future, that the competition is on the basis of the service and the types of technology that are being deployed, and we want to prevent a race to the bottom.
In response, the chairperson of the Regional Council, Chris Laidlaw, said it was a very complicated situation.
I wish there had been a simpler formula for it. The PTOM legislation is flawed in many respects. It is, and the government is going to rewrite it, and I really welcome that. Part of the difficulty is that guaranteeing terms and conditions carry over is awfully difficult, because whose terms and conditions are you talking about? There's a huge array of different terms and different conditions.
But he has a blunt message for the drivers who did not turn up today.
It is unacceptable, and there are penalties for that. They are contracted to provide those services.
NZ Bus says driver availability was the main reason for the cancellations, as drivers were finishing up their contracts and using up their leave entitlements. The full rollout of the new system across the Wairarapa, Hutt Valley and Wellington City will be complete by Friday next week. There'll be a 3% overall hike in standard fares on trains and buses, alongside a range of discounts for off-peak travel and fares for children, people with disabilities and tertiary students. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Let's stay in Wellington because of this wonderful southern right whale that is in the harbour. Locals are enjoying today's show, but New Zealand's largest fireworks show may be cancelled if the marine guest hangs around. Mediana Johnson reports.
Wellington waterfront was bustling with excitement today as locals tried to get a glimpse of the southern right whale. One man was lucky enough to get within 20 metres of the whale after the Dominion Post ferry offered those gathered at the waterfront this morning a free whale watching tour.
When I grabbed my coffee and just walked back to the waterfront, they announced and took us out to see the whale. We saw the whale coming up and breathing and diving back in. Yeah, and he showed his fins, and it was pretty awesome.
Department of Conservation Marine Species Support Officer Hannah Hendricks says it is the first time in 8 years a southern right whale has visited the harbour. The whale breed was almost hunted into extinction, but has since made a comeback, she says. However, she is warning locals not to get too close to the whale.
I really like people to give it some space.
So there are the marine mammals regulations that dictate how far you're supposed to stay away from the whale, and vessels should be 50 metres from the whale at all times, and only 3 vessels within 300 metres.
Police have been out patrolling the water this afternoon to ensure boats and kayakers keep their distance. The Wellington City Council are debating whether to postpone the Matariki fireworks event this weekend, an annual fixture that sees thousands of people converge upon the waterfront. Deputy Mayor Jill Day says the council are currently consulting with experts.
Our officers are working hard to get all the information they possibly can, so obviously talking to experts who understand the behaviours of these beautiful animals, and also just how a fireworks show would impact on that.
Locals were firmly in support of cancelling the fireworks event if the whale is still in the harbour come Saturday.
I'd rather see whales than fireworks any day of the week.
Yeah, I think they should definitely, even if they're not entirely sure if he's still there or not, it'd be much nicer to think that he's not going to be disturbed.
If the whale is still here, I'd cancel. No, protecting the wildlife is more important.
For Checkpoint, call Miriana Johnson Tierney.
Absolutely lovely. Have you done whale watching off Kaikoura?
Yes, many years ago. It's fantastic.
Yeah, really moving, isn't it?
It really is. They're amazing creatures.
Wonderful. Go Welly. Here's the pips.
RNZ News at 6. Ngamihi o te po. Good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The Justice Minister Andrew Little has described the culture and conduct in a report into sexual misconduct at the law firm Russell McVeigh as unacceptable. Mr Little says he'll look closely at the recommendations made by Dame Margaret Baisley. Today, Dame Margaret released a review into allegations of sexual misconduct relating to incidents at company parties over the summer of 2015 to 2016, in which several women were groped and kissed by a senior partner. Her report found a work hard, play hard culture, which led to excessive drinking and crude behaviour. Russell McVeigh's chairman, Malcolm Crotty, says the firm accepts the report and its recommendations, and work is already well underway to change the firm's culture. Auckland Police are standing by the use of tasers to arrest a man who later died in hospital. Officers were called to a house in Freeman's Bay on Sunday where an elderly man was being violently assaulted. Annika Smith reports.
The police say 29-year-old Alo Nata from Tonga was tasered by 2 police officers when he moved towards them in a threatening manner, ignoring repeated warnings. Having watched helicopter footage of the event, Superintendent Karen Malthus said she stood by her officers' actions, as restraining the man with their bare hands was not an option. She says Mr Nata was in medical distress when he arrived at the Auckland Police Custody Unit and was given CPR. He died in hospital 3 days later. The case has been referred to the Independent Police Conduct Authority, WorkSafe and the coroner, ko Annika Smith Tēnei.
The Serious Fraud Office has been given evidence of potential serious staff misconduct at the Ministry for Primary Industries. MPI says the evidence is part of the State Service Commission's inquiry into the use of the security firm Thomson & Clark by all government departments. The details of the misconduct are not being revealed, but the ministry says it's very disappointed by the nature of it. It says it doesn't involve the contracting of Thomson & Clark, but other matters likely had to have occurred before October 2013 and involving staff who are no longer working for MPI. It adds that it's confident that current processes, structure and culture make it unlikely these events would occur now. A young couple living off a salary of $29,000 a year says the $180,000 cap for Kiwibuild homes is too high. The government yesterday revealed the eligibility criteria for owning one of its Kiwibuild houses. The Housing Minister, Phil Twyford, says the relatively high income cap is fair because many couples earning that much have been shut out of high demand markets like Auckland and Queenstown. Mr Twyford says there will be a ballot system for prospective buyers and those whose names are drawn will get the first chance to buy. But Fazil Ali and his partner Pipirangi Snowball says the pool of eligible people is too broad.
That's not really fair. It's keeping a circle, keep the poor poor and make the rich richer. That's all I see.
Fazil Ali. Disaster authorities in Thailand are leaving it up to rescuers inside the cave with a group of missing boys to decide how best to bring them out. The 12 teenagers and their coach have now spent 12 nights trapped in the flooded cave complex. A team of Thai and British divers found the boys on Monday, perched on a small muddy bank in a flooded chamber. The Navy has suggested they could be in the cave for months waiting for floodwaters to recede. But others say the boys could be out in a few days if water can be pumped out of the cave complex and they can be taught to use scuba gear. The acting Prime Minister, Winston Peters, is still pushing for a referendum whether the Māori seats should be abolished. A members' bill introduced by Labour MP Rino Tirakatane to entrench Māori seats will undergo its first reading soon after being pulled from the ballot in May. Winston Peters says his party, New Zealand First, will not support the bill as it stands, but would reconsider if an amendment was made.
Well, if they put an SOP in for referendum, well, let's put it all our cards on the table as to whether there should be Māori seats, and if so, should they be entrenched? It should be a two-part referendum.
Winston Peters says matters relating to changing the electorate system should be put to the public. Air New Zealand has taken an opportunity at Parliament to highlight what it says are unnecessary increases in landing and other fees by the country's airports. Representatives from the airline appeared at Select Committee to give a submission on the Commerce Amendment Bill. The bill will give greater regulatory powers to the Commerce Commission, which Air New Zealand hopes will help stop the airport's fee hikes. The airline says each time the fee rises, the cost falls on customers' tickets. It's 6:05. Sport. New Zealander Michael Venus and his partner Raven Klaasen are just 2 games away from reaching the second round of Wimbledon. The pair were 2 sets and a break up on Australians Leighton Hewitt and Alex Bolt when play was suspended due to rain. They'll suspend their match overnight while fellow New Zealanders Marcus Daniel, Artem Sitak and Aaron Routliffe are all get their respective first round doubles matches underway as well. He might be in the Super Rugby competition's leading try scorer, but it hasn't saved Ben Lamb from being dropped from the Hurricanes for this weekend's match against the Blues in Wellington. After 3 straight losses which threatened to derail their season, coach Chris Boyd has made 9 changes to the starting lineup, both personnel-wise and positionally, which lost to the Queensland Reds last round. Lamb has scored 14 tries this season, but the most in the competition, but Boyd was unimpressed with attacking work of his 3 quarters that he has decided to shake things up. The former Silver Fern and veteran Southern Steel player Wendy Frew is retiring from netball. Frew's announced today that this will be her last season in the ANZ Premiership. The 33-year-old played her one and only test for New Zealand against Australia in 2008. Last year she was badly injured when the team van crashed in Christchurch and she needed 70 stitches. A month later Frew ruptured her Achilles tendon but was determined to return to play for the Steel again this year. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the final of our true crime series, Gone Fishing. But will we find out who did it? In fact, do we find out if anyone did anything? Our changing world searches for Kauri-resistant Dakota dieback. And Motoko Kakabayashi is on the line from Tokyo. The Yamanote line, to be precise. Wouldn't want to be stuck on that during a power cut.
Gee, they look after you when you win a Queen's Young Leaders Award, don't they?
At Buckingham Palace, we had sort of a networking event, and I was talking to David Beckham. One of the royal staffers came up to us and they said, the Duke and Duchess request your presence. And David goes, oh, me. And then they go, oh no, her.
Lately with Karen Hay, 10 p.m. weeknights on RNZ National.
Oh, that's such a great cut. Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Auckland, cloudy periods, the odd shower mainly near the coast. Waikato to Manawatu, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty and the central high country, mainly fine with morning frosts or fog in sheltered places. But Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, cloudy periods today with a few light showers north of Wairoa, fine tomorrow. Horowhenua, Kapiti and Wellington, fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow and a few showers developing. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and North Otago, fine with high cloud. Central Otago, Dunedin, Clutha and Southland, often cloudy with scattered light rain. Northwest gales in exposed places tomorrow night. For Buller and Westland, a few showers turning to heavy rain south of the glaciers tomorrow. Fiordland, rain becoming persistent and heavy overnight, and the Chatham Islands, showers today, mainly fine tomorrow. It's 8 minutes past 6 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Gosh, we're receiving a lot of feedback. Let's have some of it in a moment, but let's return to This damning independent report into the law firm Russell McVeigh, which has found it had a so-called work hard, play hard culture, which in some instances led to excessive drinking, cynically playing summer clerks who are university students basically with drink, crude and drunken behaviour and sexual harassment. It also identified pockets of bullying. The company commissioned the review after allegations of sexual misconduct were made about parties held by the firm over the summer of 2015-16, that Christmas period. A group of women working as summer clerks were kissed and groped at a Christmas party, and 2 other incidents of sexual misconduct were also identified. It was also the follow-up that was studied. Anne-Marie May reports.
Dame Margaret Baisley says the young women who were sexually harassed told her they felt intimidated, confused and uncomfortable about what happened. She has found the firm missed warning signs leading up to the abuses, and there was a lack of leadership in the Wellington office.
I've concluded that the firm handled the incidents poorly and that the failures had serious consequences on the people involved.
Russell McVeigh's chairman, Malcolm Crotty, attended a press conference this morning and said the firm accepted Dame Margaret's recommendations and is deeply worried about the impact the incidents have had on the young women involved.
And one of those recommendations was we acknowledge and apologise for our mistakes in handling those incidents, and I do so. I want to acknowledge that our handling of the incidents was poor and to apologise for both our actions and inactions. We could have done much better, and we should have done much better.
Dame Margaret's report found the firm's actions in the aftermath of the sexual misconduct incidents were also not up to scratch, and Malcolm Crotty acknowledged that today.
We should have had outside experts involved and didn't. Specialist counselling, independent legal advice for the young woman. And again, those are things we could have done and should have done and didn't do. And we acknowledge that and apologise for it.
A senior partner at Russell McVeigh, Pip Greenwood, says the firm is now very clear about what is expected in a partner.
And we will be holding people to account for that. And if there are people in this organisation that don't meet those standards, then there will be consequences. And also, there may be some people that Russell McVeigh isn't where they want to work in the future.
Dame Margaret Baisley has praised the women who had the courage to speak up.
The young people who were involved in these disgraceful incidents and who have had the courage to speak out have been a catalyst for change for Russell McVeigh and the wider legal profession. It's my hope that the changes proposed will ensure that future generations of young lawyers will be safe and able to realise their full potential.
However, a former lawyer who left the sector after suffering years of inappropriate sexual behaviour says Dame Margaret's report is simply window dressing and Russell McVeigh has carried out an exercise in trying to minimise blame. Olivia Wensley says there was clear misconduct by some of the firm's staff and a ministerial inquiry is needed to look at wider issues in the law profession.
The law profession as a whole is far too small. Everyone knows each other and there's definitely circling of the wagon going on. That's why I think there needs to be a reform of legislation so that these abuses of power simply cannot continue.
Meanwhile, the Justice Minister Andrew Little says the culture and conduct described by Dame Margaret Baisley is totally unacceptable and highlights the need for improvements in the legal profession. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
Lots of feedback coming in, most of it pretty critical of that culture at Russell McVeigh. This from Bridget. Hi John, I used to be married to a lawyer who conveniently, along with his friends, played along with the work hard, play hard exemption for bad behaviour, as if others who work hard in other vocations might even have tried that argument on, or as if other professions should view their hard work as an occupational hazard. Poor things. People pretty angry about this one. Lots of you also texting in about MSD. Really polarised responses on MSD. Somebody saying, why don't you stop MSD bashing? They do a very difficult job very well. Then someone else says, who else thinks Viv Rickards was talking? And they use the S word. A lot of people texting in their experience of having been investigated by MSD, and the complainant they believe was a former partner. We're going to get in contact with some of you. We do want to keep looking at this. Someone else objecting to the use of the word clients, taxpayers' money, the neoliberal rot runs deep, what happened to our public services? And others saying it's entirely legitimate to investigate people where fraud is suspected. I guess the question is, where does the suspicion come from? And if the complainant, or the alligator for want of a better term, is somebody against whom there is a protection order, is that enough for an investigation to commence? That is what we will continue to consider here on Checkpoint. It's 6:13. Thank you for your feedback. One gorgeous piece. I accused Viv Rickard of a rhetorical flourish, and somebody, bless them, has texted in, John Campbell is one big rhetorical flush. Good on MSD for protecting taxpayer money. Nothing like a good rhetorical flush. It's 6:14. Text 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Let's change the subject entirely. The police are refusing to release any video evidence around the death of a man after he was tasered at the weekend. 29-year-old Alon Nata died in hospital yesterday after being tasered 4 times by police on Sunday afternoon. Police say he was violently assaulting a 76-year-old man outside a home in Freeman's Bay in Auckland, and they had no choice but to taser him 4 times. But there is lots of objective evidence that police are refusing to release. Video from the police Eagle helicopter, video from the taser cameras, and video from inside the police custody unit. So far, what we have is the police version of events, but none of that objective evidence being released. Zach Fleming went to the media conference with Superintendent Karen Malthus, Auckland City District Commander, this afternoon.
It took 4 police officers to restrain him. He was handcuffed, his feet were restrained, and a spit hood was applied also. The offender was then transported to the Auckland Police Custody Unit, where he continued to resist police, including on the removal of the prongs from the taser and the restraints. After that, the police officers continued to monitor the deceased, but however they realised that he was in medical distress. They commenced CPR immediately, called the ambulance, which also continued with CPR. And he was then taken to hospital. And sadly and tragically, 3 days later, he died.
He was tased 4 times. Why wasn't he taken to hospital? Why did you take him into custody?
It wasn't apparent at that stage that he needed medical attention.
But is it normal to tase someone 4 times?
In this situation, it's quite appropriate, yes. The normal course on taking a prisoner to the cells would then, the next step would be a medical review at the cells. That would be normal and what would have normally have happened. However, his medical condition, his distress happened very rapidly and the ambulance was called.
How long after he was tasered did you first notice he needed medical attention?
I don't actually have that timing, so it's so from transport from Beresford Street to the police custody unit in Mount Eden. So
on the same day though?
Absolutely, on the same day.
A ballpark figure, a few hours?
Easily within a few hours. So this is a very progressive movement from the incident into police custody to the cells to being taking the restraints off to medical distress, yes.
Why don't you know how much time passed in between him being tasered and his medical health deteriorating? You've had since Sunday to learn that.
Oh, look, absolutely, and my apologies for not looking that up before I came down today. We do know what time that will be, I just don't know what time that is.
But that's a key part of information,
indeed,
right?
And I can only apologise to you. No, it won't be 4 hours past. It's, how long does it take to drive from Beresford Street to the custody unit to take someone out of the...
So his health was then possibly deteriorating on the way to Beresford Street, right?
Those are things that will form part of the investigation. Yeah, absolutely.
Given the quick nature that you have to make these decisions, though, what sort of training do you give your staff to be able to realise if there is a health issue? If indeed this man was seen clutching his chest moments before or around that time, are they not in a position to make a quick decision? Because clearly that's...
Yes, yeah, and of course they are. And so there was no obvious signs that he was in distress at the time at the scene at the incident. This is occurred in the custody unit. So yes, we are trained around that. So this is a man that was still resisting police interaction with him after he was restrained and put in the vehicle. When he was taken out of the vehicle, he's still resisting with police. So. As I say, part of the normal course would be for a medical assessment in the custody unit. We weren't even able to get to that point.
So at this point, would those 2 officers do the same thing tomorrow if they were in the same situation, do you think?
Having watched that footage, I hope so.
The police have been very proactive in putting out a very detailed press release, which is not common in a case like this. Usually it just says there's an investigation.
Yeah.
Given that, would you release the taser footage or the police Eagle footage, seeing as police want to be very proactive in front-footing this?
So this is an investigation on behalf of the coroner, so I'm not at this stage at liberty to release any footage whatsoever, so that's a matter for the coroner our investigation gets referred through to the coroner, who will make those decisions, but at this time, so no, I won't be releasing any of that footage.
Is there any other footage? There's the Eagle, the taser, is there footage from inside the custody unit?
Yes, there is, yeah.
Okay, great. Can you commit to releasing all of that once those investigations are over?
No, I can't commit to doing that. That's a matter for the coroner.
That's visual information. You're giving us verbal information now. Why is there a distinction there?
I have to we weigh up both the public interest, but also this is a matter that's a live investigation.
Superintendent Karen Malthus, Auckland City District Commander, speaking earlier this afternoon. UK counter-terrorism police say a British man and woman have been poisoned by the same nerve agent, Novichok, that was used to poison a former Russian spy and his daughter. The two victims, both in their 40s, fell ill in the town of Amesbury after visiting gardens in nearby Salisbury, close to the spot where the spy and his daughter were stricken in March. This report from the BBC.
Dawn Sturgis and Charlie Rowley fell ill at the same address in Amesbury, but a few hours apart. Both were taken to Salisbury District Hospital, and initially police thought they'd been exposed to a batch of contaminated drugs, heroin or crack cocaine. But both became critically ill, and medical tests proved inconclusive. Neil Basu, the Metropolitan Police Assistant Commissioner in charge of counter-terror policing in the UK, set out what happened next.
On Monday the 2nd of July, due to concerns over the symptoms both the man and the woman were displaying, samples from both patients were sent to Porton Down Laboratory for analysis. Following the detailed analysis of those samples, we can confirm that the man and woman have been exposed to the nerve agent Novichok, which has been identified as the same nerve agent that contaminated both Yulia and Sergei Skripal.
Mr Basu said there was no evidence that the couple had visited any of the sites decontaminated in the aftermath of the Skripal poisoning, and the priority was to establish how the pair came into contact with the nerve agent. He added he was not in a position to say whether the Novichok was part of the same batch that poisoned Sergei and Yulia Skripal. At least 5 sites in Amesbury and Salisbury have been sealed off as part of the investigation. The Chief Medical Officer for England, Professor Dame Sally Davies, said anyone who'd been to one of those areas since 10 p.m. on Friday should wash the clothes they were wearing and wipe down any shoes or bags before disposing of them. But she stressed that such advice was due to an abundance of caution rather than because of any serious risk.
Our priorities at this time are to care for the patients and to understand the circumstances surrounding how these 2 individuals became unwell, thus ensuring there is no further risk to the public's health from this incident. As the country's Chief Medical Officer, I want to reassure the public that the risk to the general public remains low.
But people living close to the housing estate where the couple were taken ill have been shaken by the sight of police, ambulances and special response teams in protective suits. They've spent the past few days wondering about a connection to the Skripals. Chloe Edwards is one of them.
Well, obviously I did think it was connected to the Russian attack in Salisbury, but that was because of the suits. But it was kind of all nerve-wracking. It was a bit worrying. You kind of want to know what happening. I mean, it's so quiet around here, nothing really happens. It was such a shock for something that severe to be happening around here.
So now a major investigation is underway into what police have described as a reckless and barbaric criminal act.
The BBC's Richard Lister. Oamaru could be the site of a new multi-million-dollar floating hotel, the first of its kind in the country. But some locals are worried about the impact of such a building on rare local wildlife. Our Otago Southern reporter Tess Brunton has more.
The proposed 25-room, 4.5-star hotel has been generating a lot of excitement in Oamaru, which is facing a shortage of high-end accommodation. An unnamed developer approached the Oamaru Licensing Trust with the idea and offered to lease his barge to house the hotel. The Trust's general manager, Kathy Marker, says it's the type of accommodation that will be a drawcard for visitors.
You can go and build a hotel. That's not necessarily why people are going to come and stay. If it's something different and, you know, they're more prepared to say, well, let's stay there rather than go and carry on to Christchurch or Timaru. We want to keep them in Oamaru if we can.
The Trust has already approached Stufkins and Chambers architects to design the hotel, and steampunk-inspired features haven't been ruled out. Tourism Waitaki General Manager Margaret Munro says the proposal would boost accommodation in the region.
It actually expands the market that you can go and reach if you've got a wider range of accommodation, which is your medium to your high end. So if you've only got sort of your middle 3 to 3.5 star accommodation, that's sort of the market that will be attracted to the region. But if you go that higher level up, you're going to get the high end traveller.
With the Council's proposal to seek UNESCO Global Geopark status later this year and increasing tourist numbers, Ms Munro says accommodation needs to be the focus for the future.
So at the moment, we have got limited bed numbers in that high-end area. We'd be really looking to have at least, if we can have at least 100 extra rooms available sort of in the next 4 years would be the ideal amount in the 4.5 to 5 star sector.
But the proposal has not got universal support. University of Otago paleoecologist Dr Nick Rollins says the project could disturb the rare Otago shag's breeding colony nearby and trigger a mass nest abandonment from the nearby Sumpter Wharf.
What would happen is the birds would run around the colony, crush the eggs, abandon the breeding colony. That if we lose, there's a real danger that the Otago shag will go into an extinction vortex and we won't actually have the species around in the future.
Dr Rollins says developments need to enhance or preserve the wildlife to prevent any disturbance to the colony. Waitaki District Mayor Gary Kircher says the hotel would enhance Oamaru's reputation as an interesting and quirky place to visit. Mr Kircher says many people visit Oamaru but stay elsewhere because of the limited range of high-end accommodation. He hopes the hotel proposal will keep tourists in the town.
It certainly has that ripple effect. They're not looking at putting a restaurant in there, so putting this in an area where there's a good number of quality restaurants around and the licensing trust is doing it on the basis that people will stay there but they'll leave their accommodation to go and eat and spend their money around the place.
While there's no time frame for the hotel proposal to get off the ground, or indeed the water, its backers are keen to get the ball rolling. Mo te hōtaka o te ahipo nei, ko Tess Brunton, tēnei.
Let's go from Oamaru to South Auckland, where hundreds of young people are uniting in a move to change negative perceptions about their community. They're part of a show called Heads Held High, which is a collection of real-life stories from students around South Auckland, and Dara Stewart has more.
Always the bad. Give us a break. Just for once. For the sake of South Auckland. Focus on the good.
The sound of a community of youth who have united to reclaim their story. Among a cast of 80 students from 9 different schools around South Auckland, these kids are frustrated with how the media continually portrays them. Takanini Lafo, Punipao Lavea and Agnes Milford say they've had enough.
We're constantly demeaned by the media, we're constantly discriminated against, and it's just got that negative connotation to it. There's so many good things that us here in South Auckland do, but the media just emphasises on the negativity. That's what hurts us.
We are not going to let the media continue to belittle our value and belittle our culture and our family, because we are capable.
The term South Auckland is often tied to stories of poverty, crime and violence in the media, which reflect on its largely Pacific population. Government figures show populations within some South Auckland suburbs are among the lowest income earners in the country and hold some of the highest crime rates. Cast members Agnes, Tito Finau, Peter Leao Pepe and Takanini say there's so much more to where they live.
There are so many things that the media and people out there misplace. We are misunderstood.
We aren't just thugs, criminals. We're not just, young, stupid students looking for a fight. We're kids working hard, but that's something you never see on the media.
We're also good parents, good brothers, good sisters, good children.
I am not what the media has said about me or my people. I am not the criminal that you see on Police 10-7. I am not the person that you see on the headlines.
When you see something on TV or you see someone who you know has a lot of power and they say something, you end up believing it because you're like, oh, that person's on TV, then you're like, that person must be telling the truth.
Local high school teacher and co-director of the show, Denise Su'a, agrees.
The media continuously get it wrong, and that's the struggle, is trying to prove to people that we are more than what the media thinks.
Agnes points to a recently published headline as an example.
Manurewa High School, their Will Smith dance, Manurewa is obviously in South Auckland, and the fact that the media said, oh, Auckland school gets acknowledged by Will Smith, but when it's something like a brawl fight, it's South Auckland in a school brawl fight.
Ms. Su'a says she has seen firsthand how powerful words can be.
How do people learn about South Auckland? They learn about it through the media. And anyone that's from South Auckland knows how dangerous that can be, because it creates deficit thinking within the minds of young South Aucklanders.
Michelle Johansson is the creative director of the Blackfriars Theatre Company behind the show. She says that over the last 2 years, the show has given South Auckland kids a chance to tell their own stories.
If you really want to disempower people, all you have to do is tell their story for them. Recently at the Education Summit, the keynote speaker from Ngāti Whātua said, if you do it without me and for me, then you do it to me. And we're sick of South Auckland having things done to them.
Co-director Siosaya Folau says that often stereotypes of people living in South Auckland can become stereotypes for Pacific people in general. He says watching the students reclaim their story is inspiring.
I come from a generation where there was no such platforms. It's overwhelming. It's definitely whakamawhana. It's so cool to be able to be a part of such a project.
Siosaya Folau says he hopes the production will enable more people from South Auckland to be proud of where they come from. Mo te hōtaka o te ahipō nei, ko Indira Stewart aho.
What a wonderful note to end Checkpoint with this evening. Thank you, Indira, and thank you everyone for being with us on behalf of the really excellent Checkpoint team. Have a wonderful evening. We'll see you again tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Justice Minister says he'll examine closely the recommendations of Dame Margaret Baisley in her report into sexual misconduct at the law firm Russell McVeigh. The Ministry for Primary Industries has referred to the Serious Fraud Office evidence of significant staff misconduct related to the security firm Thompson & Clark. Auckland Police say they called an ambulance 35 minutes after a man was tased 4 times while resisting arrest on Sunday. The 29-year-old died in hospital yesterday. And the authorities in northern Thailand are making renewed efforts to get a phone line into a cave system so the trapped group of boys can speak to their families. Our next news and weather is at 7.
On Gone Fishing today, Gail Maney is free but still a convicted murderer. Should she be?
Neil was never an honest person, and the fact his testimony